The Senate chamber was a cathedral of power, its marble walls steeped in history and ambition. On this crisp morning in June 2025, the air buzzed with anticipation. Cameras lined the gallery, their lenses trained on the polished desk below. Reporters whispered feverishly, their tablets glowing with breaking news alerts. The nation was watching, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Vice President J.D. Vance took his seat at the presiding chair, his expression calm but resolute. He adjusted the microphone, his fingers steady despite the weight of the moment. This was no ordinary session. The topic was government accountability, a lightning rod for political posturing, and Vance knew he was stepping into a minefield. He was no stranger to scrutiny, but today felt different. The room crackled with unspoken tension. Before Vance could call the session to order, Senator Elizabeth Warren rose from her seat. Her presence was commanding, her eyes blazing with purpose. She slammed a thick file onto her desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the chamber. "Vice President Vance," she began, her voice sharp and accusing, "the American people deserve to know why you've been silent about the mismanagement of Ohio's infrastructure funding. Or are you too loyal to Trump to speak the truth?" Gasps rippled through the room. Senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Reporters typed furiously, their fingers racing to capture the moment. Warren's words were a calculated strike, designed to humiliate Vance in front of the nation. She stood tall, her finger pointed at him like a prosecutor addressing a guilty defendant. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every nuance of her fiery expression. Vance didn't flinch. His face remained impassive, his eyes locked on Warren's. Inside, though, something stirred, a flicker of memory from a childhood spent in the shadow of poverty. He remembered being mocked as the hillbilly kid from Appalachia, the son of a struggling mother who fought to keep food on the table. He had been underestimated his entire life, dismissed by those who saw his roots as a weakness. But today, in this chamber, he was no longer that boy. He was a man with a voice, and he would use it. Warren pressed her attack, undeterred by his silence. "You sat quiet when factories closed in Ohio," she said, her voice rising. "You stayed quiet when families in your home state were poisoned by rail spills. Your loyalty to Trump blinds you to their pain." A few senators clapped, their applause a signal of support for Warren's boldness. Journalists in the gallery exchanged glances, sensing a viral moment unfolding. Social media was already alight with hashtags like #Warren calls out, Vance #. Vance leaned forward, his hands folded on the polished desk. His heart pounded, not with fear but with the weight of memory. He thought of East Palestine, Ohio, where a train derailment had unleashed a toxic nightmare on a small town. He remembered visiting the community in the aftermath, walking through streets choked with fear and uncertainty. He could still see the face of a mother he met in the hospital, her hands trembling as she described her baby's struggle to breathe. She had begged for answers, for help, but none came. Not from Washington, not from Warren. The chamber grew restless as Warren continued. "Answer the question, Vice President," she snapped. "Why do you sit silent while your people suffer?" Vance stood slowly, his movements deliberate. The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. He looked directly at Warren, his gaze steady but not cruel. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost quiet. yet it carried the weight of thunder waiting behind a cloud. "Senator," he said, "where were you when mothers in East Palestine buried their children while you were busy fundraising in Boston wine cellars?" The silence that followed was deafening. Pens dropped. A reporter in the gallery gasped audibly, the sound echoing through the chamber. Warren's face drained of color, her lips parting as if to respond, but no words came. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the composure she fought to maintain. Every senator, every staffer, every journalist knew the truth. Warren hadn't been to East Palestine, not once, and Vance's single sentence had burned that truth into the walls of Congress. The chamber remained frozen, as if time itself had paused. News anchors across the nation stumbled over their scripts, replaying the moment in real time. Hashtags like "W Vance slams Warren" and "Was East Palestine Truth" exploded on social media. Staffers in the room blinked back tears, remembering the families Vance had spoken for. Warren tried to recover, fumbling with her notes, but the words were gone. That sentence had hit her like a brick to the chest, not because it was political, but because it was real. Vance didn't smirk or gloat. He lowered his eyes for a moment, the weight of the moment settling over him. He saw the faces of those East Palestine families in his mind, their grief, their anger, their abandonment. He sat back down, his posture calm but resolute. The nation watched a man who didn't defend himself with rage, but with truth. And now the Senate had no choice but to listen. Whispers began to ripple through the chamber. "Did he just say that?" one senator murmured. "She really didn't go, did she?" another replied. Majority Whip Garcia leaned toward Warren, his voice low but urgent. "Elizabeth, you need to stop now." But Warren's pride wouldn't let her retreat. She cleared her throat, her voice shaky but defiant. "Mr. Vice President, that was dramatic, but it doesn't change." "Senator," Vance interrupted gently, his voice cutting through her words like a blade through silk. "Your name is on a Senate travel request for Boston 3 days after the derailment. You spoke at a fundraiser that night. Not a word about the disaster. I have the receipts." The chamber erupted in murmurs. An aide behind Warren buried his face in his hands. Another slid a file under the table, as if distance could shield her from the truth. Senators began checking their tablets, screens lighting up with headlines pulling from Vance's words. Outside, America was starting to ask questions. Footage from Warren's Boston fundraiser surfaced online. Wine glasses clinking, designer suits gleaming, and not a single mention of East Palestine. Vance remained seated, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. Not out of nervousness, but calculation. A folder appeared in front of him, slid wordlessly by an aide whose eyes were glassy with emotion. Inside were documents that could end careers, evidence that Warren had rerouted emergency funding, meant for rail safety, to a climate program linked to a private donor, the same donor who hosted that Boston fundraiser. Vance didn't hold up the folder. Not yet. He let the silence do the damage. Warren's composure cracked. "Are you suggesting I misused Senate funds, Mr. Vice President?" she asked, her voice sharp but trembling. Vance looked at her, his eyes carrying no hate, only disappointment. "I'm not suggesting anything, Senator," he said softly. "I'm just wondering how $2.3 million vanished from a rail safety bill into a foundation that lists your brother as a board member." The chamber exploded. Reporters leapt from their seats, shouting questions. Staffers scrambled, their faces pale. Senators sat back, stunned into silence. Warren froze, her body trembling as if struck by a physical blow. "I had no direct involvement," she stammered. "Then I'm sure you'll welcome an audit," Vance replied, his voice gentle but unyielding. "For the families of East Palestine, for the people still drinking bottled water while lobbyists toast champagne." The truth hit harder than any insult could. In a quiet Ohio church, a group of mothers watched the session on a mounted screen. One woman, Jenny, who had lost her 7-year-old son Max to toxic exposure, clutched a tissue as tears streamed down her face. She had begged for help after the derailment, but her pleas had gone unanswered. Now watching Vance, she whispered, "Someone's finally fighting for us." One by one, the small crowd stood, hands over their mouths, eyes swollen with emotion. Vance's words hadn't just exposed Warren, they had validated their pain. Back in Washington, the ripple effect was seismic. Newsrooms scrambled to verify Vance's claims. Independent journalists unearthed footage of Warren's fundraiser, confirming her absence from East Palestine. Social media buzzed with clips of Vance's sentence, set to emotional music by TikTok creators. Even late-night hosts, known for mocking Vance and Trump, played the full clip without commentary, letting the silence speak. But the most powerful reactions came from ordinary Americans. In diners in Pennsylvania, nursing homes in Indiana, and small-town churches, people gathered around screens, watching a man in a suit speak for them, not above them. A trucker posted on X, "I cried watching Vance today. Never thought a VP would fight for folks like us." A retired coal miner in Kentucky wrote, "I never cried over politics, but watching you fight back for us, I wept." In a private office, Vance sat alone, the lights low. His phone buzzed with a message from Pastor Lee in East Palestine. "You made the angels cry today, son. Keep going." Vance closed his eyes, the weight of the day settling into his bones. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about justice. As the nation processed the moment, Warren's allies fought back. A motion was introduced for an emergency review of Vance's conduct, led by Senator Bronson, a longtime insider. "This chamber deserves respect, not finger-pointing based on hearsay," Bronson declared. Vance didn't respond. He calmly slid the folder to the clerk's desk. "Not hearsay," he said. "Evidence." The clerk hesitated. "Do you wish this entered into the public record, sir?" Vance looked at Warren, who now seemed to struggle for breath. "Every word," he said, "for the mother who buried her son, for the factory worker breathing poison, for every person who trusted this chamber and got abandoned." The folder contained more than financial records. A sealed envelope marked "Confidential, Source Protection Required" slipped out. Inside was a sworn statement from a former legislative aide, detailing years of backdoor meetings between Warren and lobbyists. It included dates, memos, and details of a private account linked to a climate nonprofit Warren championed. Funds meant for clean water grants, diverted to offshore accounts. The chamber boiled with tension. Warren grabbed the edge of her desk, her face pale. She had walked into the session expecting to dismantle Vance. Now she was unraveling before the nation. Backstage, panic erupted. Warren's aides made desperate calls, attempting to leak a counterstory. A headline hit the networks: "Vice President J.D. Vance under ethics review for undisclosed investment." The claim alleged Vance failed to disclose ties to a small Ohio company, but within minutes, the story collapsed. The company had dissolved 3 years prior, and Vance had disclosed it twice in federal records. The Senate Ethics Office issued a rare live statement. There is no active review into the vice president. Claims made today are false. The nation's anger turned toward Warren and her allies. Even senators from her own party began slipping out of the chamber, distancing themselves from the fallout. Warren stood alone, her pride in tatters. In a quiet moment, Vance received a handwritten note from his mother. I saw you on TV. I remember when they laughed at us in line for food stamps. I'm crying now, J.D., because you spoke for me. He pressed the note to his heart, then stood to address the chamber one final time. I didn't come here to win, he said, his voice steady but raw. He held up a photo of a boy in dirty jeans, sitting on a porch with a school lunch in a plastic bag. That was me, and that's who I still fight for. Senators bowed their heads. Reporters wiped tears. America wept. The fallout was swift. Networks aired segments titled, Should Warren Step Down? Independent journalists linked her nonprofit to shady accounts. Senator Carmichael, a soft-spoken Democrat, stood and called for Warren to resign. I've seen scandals, he said, but I've never seen something unravel this truthfully. Warren's allies dwindled. A staffer was caught attempting to access Vance's private files, a flash drive plugged into a secure laptop. The staffer had ties to a subcommittee Warren co-chaired. The incident wasn't politics. It was a takedown attempt. Vance was escorted to a secure room, his resolve unshaken. They're coming low because I'm over the target, he told himself. A letter arrived from Clara Morgan, an 84-year-old widow from Iowa. Her husband, James, a retired rail worker, had died of lung cancer linked to a chemical leak Warren had dismissed. When I saw you stand up for people like him, I cried so hard I couldn't breathe, she wrote. You weren't just standing up to Warren. You were standing up for James. Vance traveled to East Palestine unannounced, sitting in a church gymnasium with families still grappling with the derailment's aftermath. A boy named Eli handed him a drawing of Vance at the Capitol with a sign reading, You stood for us. Vance hugged him, fighting tears. My mom said you're the first grown-up who really meant it, Eli whispered. Back in Washington, Warren faced the cameras. I made decisions I thought were best, she said, her voice hollow, but I now understand the cost. She paused, then addressed Vance directly. I don't agree with everything he believes, but I know now his heart is with the people. Vance watched from East Palestine, feeling not victory but grief for a system that had failed so many. The truth had a voice now, and it was loud enough to break the silence. The aftermath rippled far beyond Washington. In small towns across America, people began organizing community meetings, inspired by Vance's stand. In Youngstown, Ohio, a group of factory workers started a petition demanding transparency in federal funding. In West Virginia, a high school teacher used Vance's speech as a lesson in civic responsibility, her students writing essays about what it meant to be heard. In rural Iowa, a veterans group held a candlelight vigil for those lost to industrial negligence, their voices echoing Clara Morgan's letter. Vance's words sparked a movement. Grassroots organizations sprang up, calling themselves the Forgotten Voices. They demanded audits of federal programs, not just in Ohio but nationwide. Posts on X surged with stories of neglected communities, each one tagged #, Vance Speaks for Us. A single mother in Michigan shared a video of her tap water, brown and undrinkable, with a caption, J.D. Vance saw us. When will the rest of Washington? In the Capitol, the Senate began to shift. Younger senators, inspired by Vance's courage, introduced bills to protect small-town infrastructure. Even critics of his politics couldn't deny his impact. A liberal commentator on a major network admitted, Vance didn't just win a debate, he reminded us what leadership looks like. At home, Vance sat with his wife, Usha, in their quiet kitchen. She handed him a stack of letters from across the country, hundreds of voices, each one a story of struggle and hope. One was from a nurse in Alabama. I work double shifts to feed my kids. Your words made me feel seen for the first time. Another was from a retired teacher in Montana. You didn't just fight for East Palestine. You fought for every forgotten corner of this country. Vance's eyes welled up as he read. I didn't plan this, he told Usha, his voice thick. I just couldn't let their pain be ignored. You didn't just speak, Usha replied, her hand on his. You gave them a voice. The next morning, Vance received a call from President Trump. J.D., you've started something big, Trump said, his voice steady. They're scared now, but don't stop. The people are with you. Vance nodded, though Trump couldn't see. He felt the weight of the responsibility, not as a burden, but as a calling. In a final interview, an anchor asked Vance why he kept fighting despite the threats. He held up Eli's drawing and Clara's letter. Because they can't sit in this chair, he said. They don't have lobbyists, but they have me. The nation wept again. Letters poured into Vance's office. Stories, photos, drawings from children, relics of American pain and pride. Schools showed his speech in civics classes. Pastors played it in churches. A coal miner wrote, You gave us back our voice. As Vance returned to the Senate, the chamber rose in a standing ovation. Not for a politician, but for a man who had given voice to the forgotten. His single sentence had changed a nation. Senator, where were you when mothers in East Palestine buried their children while you were busy fundraising in Boston wine cellars? And the fight was just beginning.